We'll start with storytelling. And the idea is to keep things incredibly simple. You'll see in this example here with my daughter standing on a stool, you can see how she got there. She brought the smaller stool, she brought it over so she could stand on the bigger stool so she could look at the birds outside in the garden. That's as simple as we want to keep it. It's a very basic narrative. And obviously, reason why you want to keep it simple is because if it's overly complex, people won't look to create a narrative in the dashboard. And it is important. Storytelling is important, but it's only going to work if people do it. So you'll see this theme consistently with the dashboard wireframe kit. I want to really focus on keeping things very, very simple. Simplicity over being too comprehensive or being overly comprehensive in that people won't do it at all. So this is like the 70-80% way there that people will actually do. Now, there are many reasons why you want to do storytelling, but one of them, more related to the action side of things, is getting the path to action very, very short, very brief. One of those reasons is Eppenghause's forgetting curve. And if you listen to my wife, she'll tell you, I don't have a forgetting curve. I just have a straight line that goes down. I'll instantly forget what she tells me. Now, for most people, it's not as bad as that. But even after 20 minutes, you nearly have forgotten almost half of what you've taken in or what you've seen or what you've heard. So this is why we want to have the path to action very, very short. So if somebody looks at a dashboard and the only way they can act on it is, it takes them several days, well, the chances are obviously going down and down and down that they're actually going to do anything about that. So we want them to be able to act as quickly as possible. And ideally, we're talking minutes. We want the dashboard to enable action in that very, very short amount of time. The longer it is, the higher the risk they're not going to do anything. Now, to do that, we keep a very, very simple narrative. And you might have heard of how Pixar and Disney go about telling a story. And I've taken that and adjusted it a little bit. It's a very common process. You'll know it in all the movies that you see. You introduce a cast of characters. So once upon a time, there was a persona. So I'm kind of framing it into the structure that we're going to be using. We're going to design around personas. And one day stuff happened. And you think of what this stuff happening is think of it as a KPI on your dashboard, a big number on your dashboard. One of them's gone orange. So something's happened. So we have a bit of a conflict if we align it to the story narrative. And because of that, there was some impact. Because of that, something happened. Now, what was it? What created it? What were the factors that influenced this? And these are likened to the chart. You may have multiple charts being impacted. There may be multiple impacts in the business. So we're leaving room that there may be other things happening. Because of that, there was some other impact. And we're going to be showing that on another chart, perhaps. Until finally, some action was taken and there was resolution. And resolution is the happily ever after. The action is not the happily ever after. And this is something we have to be careful about, because sometimes you will see prominence being given to action, but action without resolution isn't great. It's not ideal. We need to be making sure we're getting all the way through. We're getting all the way there. We're making sure that there is, the next time we open up the dashboard, that we're not seeing those things, that something has been resolved. So it's not enough just to take action. That action has to come to a resolution. Now, as we move on to how that becomes manifest in the dashboard, we think about the persona. And always we're going to have this persona focus. The view on we're designing for one user type or one user group. So let's look back at the story. Once upon a time, there was a persona. We're introducing the cast of characters. I tend to liken that to navigation. So if we think of someone who's working in HR, let's say her HR manager, what does their navigation look like? Well, the navigation is going to be something that they understand. We're kind of introducing the cast of characters. So something they understand what tabs would be, maybe attrition, diversity, workforce, recruitment, learning and development. They're all things that they'll instantly, yeah, I get that. I know what that is. I don't need further explanation. Whereas somebody else who's not in HR, those tabs might not be as intuitive or as obvious what they might mean. So that's where we start with the story structure, the storytelling structure. So navigation first. And of course, depending on technology that you're developing on, the navigation mightn't be at the top. It might be at the bottom. It might be elsewhere. Then we move on to the story highlight. So think of these as the KPIs. So, okay, something happened. There's some conflict. Something's going on. This is drawing our attention. It's telling us, hey, look at me. There's something happening here. Maybe a KPI's gone orange. Let's say our net margin's gone orange. So do I need to act? Do I need to do something? Well, yes. If it's gone orange, yes, you should. Now, when you open a dashboard, the idea here is to look at it and go, okay, do I need to do something? So if there's nothing telling you to do something, you can close the dashboard. This is the beauty of this approach. And then we get on to the resolution. So if there is something that you need to do and it's being highlighted in the KPIs, what should you do? Well, you look to the charts. The charts should both give you the understanding of what's causing it and what's going on, but also what action you need to take and ultimately how to resolve it to have the happily ever after. So then you take that action and next time you open the dashboard, that's no longer there. So developing that a little bit further and seeing how that might look on a more conceptual view of a dashboard. You can see we have the tabs at the top of the dashboard. And as discussed earlier, these relate to the persona. So the HR example, we'd have workforce attrition, diversity, and these would be easily understandable by the persona that's using this dashboard. And we move down to the KPIs. And using the storytelling format, you can see your attention is being drawn to this KPI 2. It's orange. Now, your eye is then drawn downwards and you're following that pattern. You're seeing, well, what else is orange? And because we followed this process of very, very deliberate and intentional design for action, that we know these two charts are related to what's going up above and the KPI. Now, if you look over to the right, you can see that there is an action associated with the chart on the right specifically. The action is to call the supplier and ask, why are we short on inventory for 3 product lines? And this enables us to start the journey to resolution. And what that would look like is, in this case, picking up the phone perhaps and calling the supplier and asking them if their inventory system is up to date. And if it's not, then could they please update it? And if it is accurate, then we need to place a new order. We need to get more inventory. So this is the very, very deliberate way that we would design, and it keeps a persona focus. This is what enables this level of action, is the persona focus, the very, very tight rigor around designing for a specific user group. Now, how that looks like on the actual kit itself is opening up the board, and we see there's a title there, and this title is your tab title. And you're going to end up designing multiples of these. So you'll create one tab and you'll take photographs of it, and then you'll continue on to the next tabs. So you can see up here, it's laid out the same as the layout earlier. We have filters down the left, we have KPIs at the top, and then we've got the main chart area where we have space for 4 charts. You'll also notice that there's a numbering system going on. You can see the filters, F1, F2, F3. The KPIs are K1 through K4, and the charts are C1 through C4. And these are used so they can reference each other. Once we look at the KPI cards, you'll see there's space on the back of the cards to write down which chart is being referenced. And that's to maintain that connection and the storytelling between, okay, there's a KPI and we'll know which chart we need to look at or which chart is related to that KPI to help us take action and ultimately find resolution. Now you'll notice some gray spaces here on the board, and these provide examples. Anything that's gray here is an example. So you can see on the far right, the KPI, okay, sales versus forecast is the title of it. And it's minus 7%, it's orange. And we can see it's tied to C2. So imagine there's a card here, a chart card, and we'd been focusing on creating an action for that KPI and how to solve it. and how to understand it better. So we can better understand it by looking. We can see, well, it looks like we're short in inventory for 3 items. And it's got an action related to it. I'm just calling out here, you wouldn't write it directly on the card itself, but you would then understand that you would need to take a certain action in order to resolve it. And then you can see the filter down the bottom left. It's showing an example of what a region filter could look like. Also embedded here is training. And this is going to be a theme you see throughout this process is what's the fastest, easiest way to get people up to speed, to reduce friction, and to increase the probability of them adopting the dashboard. Now imagine you're going to be sharing this with somebody and they don't really understand the concept. Well, you can take a picture of the board as it is, and then you would take a picture once you put the cards on there and the charts on there. So sending them a picture of this, it has the overall concepts included. So you can see the filters. It explains what a filter is, why you would use them. You can see the KPIs. It explains the story that exists and the connection that exists between KPIs and charts. And then in the charts, it talks a little bit about storytelling, picking the right type of chart, and the general structure that you want to follow. So this is also how I do training of dashboards as well. So when you have a dashboard and the training materials are separate to the dashboard, it can be a challenge for people to find them. And if they don't find them, then they might not use the dashboard as intended. So there's consequences to that. Now the cards have 2 sides. There is the sort of meta information side, which is this top row here. And then there's the presentation side of it, which is the bottom row. Looking at the KPI cards, in this example, we have the money KPI. And on the presentation side, if you look down at the bottom row, you can have a title. You would write that in. We keep the titles short for KPIs. And then you would enter a dollar figure. And this one's got the dollar symbol written already, so you can see the sort of size that you should be writing your numbers in there. They're nice and big. Now on the meta information side of that, on the top row, you can see there's 2 things to fill in here. One is, when does it change color? So remember, we want to draw someone's attention in when they look at the KPI. So there has to be some way to do that. And when does that happen? When does it change color? So this is usually when you have a target or a threshold. So you'd write this in here, say if our margin goes below 30%, this is going to be orange. And this is also a nice way to communicate to the other people involved in this dashboard project what the intent is and when it changes. So you reduce the amount of back and forth going between people on trying to understand what's going on. Now you recall on the dashboard layout itself, we had the numberings for each of the spaces. So for the charts, there's C1, C2, C3, C4. So this is on the KPI where you would reference what chart you're going to continue the narrative and continue the story and how to resolve this KPI and change its color back to gray or black or the normal non-incident color. Moving over to the filters, you can see on the presentation there, very, very simple, just a title, and then you can write in what the actual filter is. So an example title could be country, and the items you'd enter in below would be USA, Canada, Ireland, etc. On the reverse side of that, on the meta information side, you can write your notes. And an example for a note on a filter might be, let's say it's a region. Say your region, it's a region filter, and the regions are Asia, Europe, Americas. And the note you might write here is, if item selected, expand, drill down to country level. So that filter would change what's inside it. So that would be a good way to explain that to whoever you need to explain it to. And finally, the chart cards. On the presentation layer on the bottom row, you can see there's a big space for a title. And in there, that space is for writing a question. And as we go through the process, we frame everything in questions, in the form of a question. So both technical people and non-technical people alike can understand what's going on. And it's also a nice way to have it easily understandable by people who are new to the dashboard. If they're just able to read, oh, this is the question, that's what this chart answers. Ah, okay. Less requirement for training. You'll also see there's a space to fill in the X and Y axis on this particular chart. Depending on the chart type, there may be more or less things to fill in there. However, more importantly is the meta information side of this, the top row. You'll see it gives you the name of the chart, vertical bar in this case. You also see there's a nice little graphic of that over to the top right. And the idea here is if you're flicking through your deck of cards, your chart cards, you can quickly find the chart type you're looking for by just scanning up the top right corner. So you don't have to pull out every card. You can just flick through them quickly and spot the one you want. On the bottom part, you'll see there's the usage. And this helps you decide which chart is most appropriate for the question that you want to answer. So this helps in chart selection. This example you see, this is good for composition and distribution. So as we go through the process, we'll be creating and crafting what those questions are that we need answered from the dashboard. You write the question, one question per chart, into this area up here, what question is being answered. And under that, there's space to write what action is to be taken and under which conditions. So obviously there's only a set of conditions that would need to be satisfied in order for you to take action. Not every chart on the dashboard is actionable by default, and most of them really shouldn't be. Otherwise, you'd be constantly having to do things in the dashboard. The idea is to define when action would need to be taken. So an example, again, using the, let's say, net margin. Well, we can see net margin compared to this time last month is down. So if that happens, then we want to take such and such action. So that's the idea. That's the idea behind the cards here. And we'll be walking through how to fill these out throughout this process. Now, another thing to note here, which is quite a benefit, is these are reusable. You don't have to worry about, oh, am I writing in the right question? Am I writing in the right thing? What if I want to use this card again? You can just erase it. And the things I found most useful for that, or the most effective, are these dry erase pens, specifically the ultra fine size. That's going to give you the detail you need to be able to write in on those size of cards. And then for wiping them, just use a dry erase wipe. I personally use our youngest daughter's diaper bum wipes, so I didn't want to include that here. Didn't think it would be appropriate. But if you have them, they work. I can attest to that. Moving quickly on from that, you might recall at the start I mentioned there's two main ways that you can use the kit. One is ad hoc, as needed. This is the main way that I use it. So I would just open up the kit and I'll just knock something out myself. Obviously, I will have understood the requirements, and I've done this so often now that I'm quite comfortable doing this, and it serve as something that I can share with the stakeholders and users to start getting feedback right away. And then I can end up iterating a few times on that. And generally this process, it'll take a few days to get the feedback and get a wireframe that's somewhat reasonable. A caveat there tends to be a low number of users, say a lower risk type dashboard. Maybe you've got 10 users of the dashboard. I think that's perfectly fine doing it this way, and it's so much better than not using the kit for those purposes. However, there is another more comprehensive way, part of the process, and that process is what we're going to dive into right now. It is called the Enterprise Dashboard process, and this is something I created through my years of consulting and having done so many workshops and trainings that it all gets distilled down to this set of steps that we're going to walk through. We're going to go through this process up until the wireframing and getting feedback on the wireframe. However, the process does extend beyond that once you go into development and adoption and training and launching it and going beyond just wireframing. So we're going to start here with understanding why we actually need the process. And we kind of highlighted this at the start of the session, but it's worth calling out. There is obviously the people side of it, and the people is the biggest part of this. The biggest reason for having this process is really ultimately to bring people together with a common understanding of business value. And you're only really going to achieve that if you have a positive user experience. You can bring people together around a bad user experience, and then it's just going to make things worse, right? It's going to exacerbate the problems, and then you're going to have an even harder time getting around it in the future. And of course, data quality is a great reason to use this process, because since it is fundamentally a communication process that we have here and understanding people, then getting the means and the access and support to improve data quality is a nice outcome from using this process. And then towards the end of it, you'll see there's more information that's related to how to get a adoption, discoverability, and how people can find your dashboard, which is obviously a big problem. If someone can't find your dashboard and you've built it, then why did you do it in the first place? So let's walk through the process from a high level first, and then we'll do a deep dive into it, into each step. So the process starts with understanding what the objectives are, and we're going to interview the stakeholders. So that's step number one. Why is it that this dashboard is required? What's needed from it? And I'm going to take the example of Jane, who's a business analyst, and she's received an email from an executive saying, "Hi Jane, we need our sales performance dashboard created ASAP, please. Need it by the end of the week, and needs to include our sales volume and some sales margins. Okay, by product. Okay, please get to it right away and prioritize it." Okay, so normally what's going to happen here is Jane's just going to jump in and start creating it. Now the problem is she doesn't necessarily know the objectives. What's a win? What will make her win? What at the end of the week, that when she turns it over, the person and executive who sent her that mail is going to be delighted. So first and foremost, you need to be able to interview the stakeholders. And this is the very, very first step. Spend 15 minutes with them. Have a bit of a coffee. Understand what's driving it, what's behind it. Now after that, we need to interview the users. And we need to know what information they currently look at, what are their challenges. Have they had other dashboard experiences before? What did work, what didn't work with them? We want to understand the needs that they have, certainly the current KPIs and metrics that they use, because you can be sure that one of the primary things they're going to complain about when they see your dashboard is that, well, my old report is much better because I could see X, Y, and Z metrics and yours doesn't have any of those. And so you're just opening the door for complaints. So this helps address that. And usually I take an iterative approach to dashboards anyway. So I try to make the experience of the version 1 of the dashboard kind of broadly similar to anything they've been used to using to date. And I would look to versions 2, 3, 4 of the dashboard to start moving more towards where the dashboard needs to be in order to generate business value. So on to personas. And if you are not overly familiar with personas, they're sort of an aggregate of a bunch of users, or stakeholders. And an example of that is a HR manager. So a HR manager could be, you could have lots of different country HR managers, but they all generally have the same business goals, generally same objectives, depending on company. But we're looking for, people that share a lot of similarity in their role and what they're doing. After the personas, we're able to start framing questions that these personas need to have answered. And this is a nice way to keep things in a non-technical understanding for everyone involved in the project. We want to maintain a non-technical view of the dashboard for as long as possible so that we can continue to engage everyone in the project that needs to be engaged and get feedback. So questions will start coming in the form of a per persona, but also we want to make sure those questions that are being asked and we're ultimately going to answer with the data is aligned with the objectives coming from the stakeholders from the first step. So we have a bit of a feedback loop going on here. One of the most important steps is scenario mapping. And this helps us think a little bit more about what the user of the dashboard needs to see. This step is going to help us look at a question, understand what needs to be seen to be able to answer that question, are there any KPIs that would support that? And what is the resultant action? And we'll be using sticky notes to do this. This is like one of the core parts of the process that help us really easily go into the wireframing steps a little bit later on. Now, right after that, we'll obviously have all our questions. We'll have a bunch of steps associated with each question. We're going to start grouping these questions by theme. And these themes will then become our tabs. And if you have too many in one theme, then that's a message that we need to break that up into smaller sub-themes. So this then becomes our next step in kind of coming up with the form and the structure of the dashboard. And again, these groups and themes need to be aligned with what the user for that persona would understand. Now, moving on to the data check step. If you are someone in this process up until now does not know the data well, this is where you would consult with whoever does know the data and check if those questions can be answered in the form that the user wants them answered in. And if they can't, if some of them can't, which is likely the case, you would then start looking at versioning some of the questions. We can say, well, these 15 questions can certainly be answered in version 1 of the dashboard. With a bit of work and a bit of investment, we think these 5 questions could be answered in a version 2 in 3 months' time, and these 20 other questions could be answered in version 3 if we can hire a full-time data quality engineer and we can knock it out in a year. So it helps facilitate that discussion. But certainly data check is important if you haven't done it or someone hasn't been involved in it to date. I mean, of a similar vein, similar nature is the technology check. You can usually skip this one because you probably know what technology you're building it in anyway. But this is just to make sure that whatever tool is being used, that it can be properly implemented in the way that we want things to be laid out and look like. Building on the scenario mapping step where we identify KPIs, this is where we start using the wireframe kit and the actual cards. And we'll start writing in the KPIs, and we'll move on to the next step. We'll start identifying the charts to answer the questions from the scenario mapping and what the user needs to see in order to answer them. And then we'll start picking filters. Then we'll bring it all together and we'll stick it all in the wireframe. Usually I like to take the photos here. So you're probably going to be doing multiple tabs on a dashboard. So you're going to lay them all out. You'll do one tab at a time. You'll take a photo of the presentation layer with all the cards in their upward facing positions. And then you'll flip them all around and you'll take a photo of them in their reverse positions with the meta information. And you'll do that for each tab. And then you will share that out and make sure as you go on to the next step that you have alignment between users, stakeholders, and data. It's always good to just do another check. You can skip this one if you feel like you've got a pretty good handle on it already. It doesn't need a discrete step. But what is important is feedback. You can use these wireframes now to send around to the team and gather feedback and input into, is this what we want? Is this going to answer your questions? Is everyone okay to sign off on this visual requirements document before we start development? And that's key. If you can get everyone to buy into that, because usually what happens is questions surface during development because this is the first time people are actually being able to see a visual representation of what things are going to look like. So it's very natural for people to want to change during development because they haven't had an opportunity to visualize things before. So the wireframing does that. Now, it's still somewhat inevitable that people are going to want to change things during development. And this is the nice thing about this process. It is an iterative process. So you can always make the position that, okay, look, we've signed off on our version 1 with these wireframes and we're going to go build against those. But we're going to be iterating on version 2 really soon, actually in 3 months' time. So we're going to fit your feature request into that version and we'll plug it into the process once we start going through it again. So you are basically saying no, and you're protecting the risk during development of changing and having pivots during there, but you're also helping educate and you're giving an option to people that, look, this will come down the road. Once you finish development, it's not much point in just releasing to the public, there's a few things you need to do. You need to ensure people are going to be able to use it properly, and assume a worst case. Assume they're not going to get training. Assume people have been sick and have not heard anything about this dashboard, this upcoming dashboard. So you have to own the training part of it. And you can keep it so simple. You can keep this really, really simple. Say you have a sales tab, then you would create a sales training tab. And that would just be, take a screenshot of the sales tab, put it into PowerPoint, annotate some of it, take a screenshot of that and paste it into your sales training tab. And there you go. Is it a perfect, awesome training document? No. Are most people going to read a perfect, awesome training document? No. So the real world is just embed it, put it in the dashboard, make it available to people. And that's just like the example you saw there in the wireframe dashboard itself, the actual board. You could see how the training was embedded there. Well, that's the similar approach to this with training materials. Depending on the size of the dashboard, you might want to do a pilot. So I tend not to pilot if the user base is like under 10, 20. Let's say you've got 100 users. I tend to like to pilot to 10. That's a good number. And you get feedback from them. And doing the pilot as well is good because you have people on board. They're like, they know this isn't, supposed to be absolutely perfect. And they've been invited to participate in giving feedback. So you're going to get less criticism and more constructive feedback at this point. So you can iron those out before you actually go into launch. And for the launch, I've adapted a fantastic process from Jeff Walker, who wrote the book, The Product Launch Formula. And it works really, really well for launching dashboards inside an organization. So I recommend you look that one up. That's Jeff Walker, and it's the Product Launch Formula. Now, to ensure adoption, we have to make sure people can access and find the dashboard. If you can't find it, you can't discover it, then you're not going to use it, obviously. So even if it's the best dashboard in the world, people can't use it if they can't find it. And this is one of these fairly tough problems you find in the enterprise where maybe there's multiple technologies being used. So you can access the Tableau dashboards, but you don't have access to the Qlik portal. You don't know it's even there. Or, it's a challenge of how the dashboards are stored and curated. Are they tagged? So are they behind firewalls? Can you have permission to access them? So these are all these things that, it's important to be aware of because these are going to affect adoption and you have to have a strategy around them. And then you end up doing the whole thing again and you iterate on it. And my general advice here is to do it every 3 to 6 months, with the first year doing it every 3 months, because it's taking people on a journey. Version 1 is not going to be the most awesome dashboard in the world. It's not going to solve everyone's problems. The idea is to get people on board, to build trust, to see that this is something new, this is different. I'm gonna pay attention to this, and that you bring people on board. That version 2 of the dashboard, people are starting to see some more value coming in. Version 3, they're going, yeah, okay. End of the year, they're like looking forward to it. They want to be part of this. Right, so it's really just building anticipation around it, and it's creating this opportunity for people to be onboarded. We have to also understand that a lot of people are somewhat disconnected from the process and aren't involved, aren't interviewed, aren't brought into it. So there is, a lot of people can be quite jaded, depending on the maturity of the organization. Like we were talking about before, some of the value points. Well, obviously there's some, why would you do it? The benefits are very similar. So you're aligning people. This is bringing people together, and it's helping them to adopt it, to act on insight. So we're engaging the grassroots of an organization to start acting on the data so they can make better decisions that feed up to the bottom line of the business and ultimately provide value. And doing this wireframing process, some of the pushback you can get is, why'd you wireframe? Why don't you just build it? Just go build it right away. Because that seems faster. So there's some sense to it. It does seem faster. But ultimately, you start making changes during development. The dashboard gets released. It's not really what people wanted. You have to go back and change it. Development hours are a lot more expensive than design hours, particularly when you have a lot of people involved in the development. So you can nail it in the wireframing for a lot less and iterate for a lot less during wireframing than you would need to in the development stage, obviously. And then there's all the associated risk with that. Is there the budget there to fix a bunch of problems during development? Has there approval been given? Who's going to get ticked off? Who's going to get fired? So there's all these things. There's all these benefits to doing that. They're quite comprehensive.